Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. The exhaustion hit different that night. You know how it gets when you've been running on fumes for 16 hours straight at the hospital. 29 and already feeling like 50, working as an emergency room nurse in Cleveland had become my whole life, especially after my divorce finalized earlier that year. The highway stretched ahead of me like a black ribbon, completely empty except for the occasional semi-truck thundering past in the opposite direction. Must have been around 2 in the morning on a Wednesday in late October, when everything went sideways. The radio kept cutting in and out with static, which should have been my first warning that something wasn't right. But honestly, I just figured it was the old antenna on my beat-up Ford Explorer acting up again. All I wanted was to get home, take the hottest shower possible, and collapse into bed before my next shift started in 10 hours. The figure appeared in my headlights about 3 miles from my exit, standing right on the edge of the shoulder, where the asphalt meets the gravel. My first thought was that someone had broken down, which happens all the time on that stretch of Interstate 71 between downtown and the suburbs. The person was waving both arms above their head in that desperate way people do when they really need help, wearing what looked like a dark jacket with the hood pulled up. My nursing instincts kicked in immediately, that automatic response to help someone in distress that gets drilled into you during training. But as I started easing off the gas pedal and drifting toward the shoulder, something made me glance at my rearview mirror. And that's when I noticed how dark the road behind me had become. Like all the streetlights had suddenly gone out even though they'd been working fine just seconds before. That's when I saw them. 2 shapes emerging from behind the concrete guardrail on the passenger side, moving in this weird synchronized way that made every alarm bell in my head start screaming. They weren't running or walking normally, more like gliding forward while staying perfectly parallel to each other, maybe 15 feet apart. The person who'd been waving suddenly dropped their arms and stood completely still, not even turning their head to track my car as I was slowing down. My foot hesitated between the brake and the gas for what felt like forever, but was probably only a second or two. The 2 figures from the guardrail were wearing identical clothing, dark pants, and what looked like gray hoodies, and they moved toward my car with this terrifying sense of purpose, like they'd done this exact thing 100 times before. My nursing training includes dealing with aggressive patients and dangerous situations, but this was something else entirely, something calculated and wrong in ways I still can't fully articulate. I slammed the accelerator so hard my tires screamed against the pavement, fishtailing slightly as I jerked the wheel back toward the travel lane. In my side mirror, I caught a glimpse of all 3 figures standing in a perfect line across the shoulder, just watching my taillights disappear into the distance. My phone was in the cup holder, and I grabbed it while trying to keep the Explorer steady at 90 miles per hour, fumbling with the emergency call button. The dispatcher who answered sounded skeptical at first, probably used to false alarms and paranoid drivers, but something in my voice must have convinced her because she said units were already in the area and would check it out immediately. I kept driving way too fast all the way home, checking my mirrors every few seconds and taking a different exit than usual, just in case anyone was following me. The adrenaline didn't start wearing off until I pulled into my apartment complex and sat there in the parking lot with the engine running, scanning every shadow between the buildings. My neighbor, this retired cop named Frank, who always sits on his balcony smoking cigarettes even in the middle of the night, waved at me and called down, asking if everything was okay. I must have looked pretty shaken, because he actually came downstairs in his bathrobe and slippers to check on me. When I told him what happened, his whole demeanor changed, and he said there'd been similar reports along that stretch of highway for the past few weeks. Always late at night, always with the same pattern of someone flagging down cars while others waited nearby. The call from the police came about an hour later, after I'd finally made it inside and was sitting on my couch still wearing my scrubs, clutching a cup of coffee with both hands. The officer on the phone introduced himself as Sergeant Brennan and said they'd found something disturbing at the location I'd described. There were fresh tire marks that matched my vehicle's tread pattern where I'd accelerated away, which proved I'd actually stopped there. But here's what made my whole body go numb with fear. They also found a burned-out sedan about 50 yards further down the shoulder, hidden behind a cluster of trees. The car had been reported stolen from a mall parking lot 3 days earlier, and inside they found personal items suggesting someone had been living in it, including maps of the highway system, with certain spots circled in red marker, my exit being one of them. Sergeant Brennan asked me to come to the station the next morning to look at some security footage they'd pulled from a traffic camera about a mile before where I'd stopped. When I got there, still exhausted but too wired to sleep anyway, they showed me grainy black and white video from earlier that same night. Around midnight, 2 hours before my encounter, the camera captured what looked like 3 people dragging something heavy from a van into the woods near that exact spot. The van didn't have plates, and the image quality was too poor to make out faces, but you could see them making multiple trips back and forth. Then, about 30 minutes before I drove through, the camera caught them positioning themselves along the shoulder, with one person standing in the spot where I'd seen the waving figure, while the other 2 crouched behind the guardrail exactly where I'd seen them emerge. What really disturbed me, though, was what Sergeant Brennan told me next, while we sat in that sterile interview room with fluorescent lights humming overhead. They'd been tracking a group they suspected of running a sophisticated carjacking ring that targeted solo drivers on isolated stretches of highway. The burned car wasn't their vehicle. It belonged to a woman named Jennifer Huang who'd been reported missing 5 days earlier after leaving her night shift at a warehouse 40 miles north. Her credit cards had been used at various gas stations heading south, always late at night, always just one transaction before moving on. The police theorized that the group would use stolen vehicles until they burned them out, literally, to destroy evidence, then move on to acquiring a new one from whoever stopped to help their supposedly stranded member. The detective working the case, a woman named Carla Donovan with tired eyes and coffee stains on her sleeve, showed me Jennifer's photo from her missing person report. She looked about my age, wearing scrubs in the picture because she'd been a nurse too, working nights at a regional medical center. That detail hit me harder than anything else, knowing that we'd probably driven that same stretch of highway hundreds of times, both exhausted after long shifts, both alone in the dark. Detective Donovan said they suspected I wasn't the first person to escape this trap. There'd been 2 other reports in the past month of drivers who'd had similar encounters, but managed to speed away. The difference was that neither of them had called it in immediately like I did, and by the time they reported it days later, there was no evidence left to investigate. They kept me at the station for 3 more hours, going through every detail multiple times, having me mark on a map exactly where I'd seen each figure and which direction they'd moved. The forensics team had found footprints in the gravel that suggested at least 4 people had been present, not just the 3 I'd seen, which meant someone else had been watching from somewhere I hadn't even noticed. Detective Donovan mentioned that they'd also discovered a pattern in the timing. All the encounters happened on weeknights between midnight and 4 in the morning, when traffic was lightest and emergency response times were longest. She gave me her direct number and told me to call immediately if I remembered anything else, or if I noticed anyone following me, because sometimes these groups would fixate on the ones who got away. For the next 2 weeks, I completely changed my routine, taking different routes home, varying my schedule whenever possible, and always leaving the hospital with at least one other person walking to the parking garage. Frank, my neighbor, started checking on me every night when I got home, and I'd text Detective Donovan each time I arrived safely, which probably seemed excessive but gave me some peace of mind. Then, on a Monday afternoon, I got the call that they'd made arrests after pulling over a van on that same stretch of highway for a broken taillight. Inside were 4 people, including a woman who matched the description of the figure who'd been waving that night, along with rope, zip ties, and 3 different stolen license plates. They found Jennifer Huang's hospital ID badge hidden under the spare tire, along with personal items from at least 6 other missing persons cases spanning 3 states. The trial won't start for another few months, but Detective Donovan says my testimony will be crucial since I'm the only witness who called immediately and provided real-time evidence of their method. Jennifer Huang is still missing, along with 2 other victims they've connected to this group. And honestly, that's what haunts me most about this whole experience. I still work nights at the hospital because bills don't stop just because you're scared. But I take the city streets now instead of the highway, adding an extra 20 minutes to my commute. Sometimes when I'm driving home and see someone on the side of the road, even in broad daylight, my chest gets tight and I have to remind myself to breathe. The thing that really stays with me, though, is knowing that if I'd stopped just a few seconds longer, if I'd actually gotten out to help like my instincts first told me to, I would have been another missing person case, another burned out car on the shoulder, another nurse who never made it home from her shift. At 31, I'd been driving cross-country routes for my job as a medical equipment sales rep for almost 6 years, and I'd never had anything worse happen than a flat tire in broad daylight. That night in early September 2022 changed everything about how I travel now. I'd just finished a late presentation at a hospital in Des Moines and was heading to my next appointment in Kansas City, figuring I'd drive through the night and grab a motel room when I got there around 4 in the morning. My silver Toyota Camry had been acting up lately, making this weird grinding noise whenever I turned left too sharply, but my mechanic buddy told me it was probably just the power steering fluid getting low. Nothing urgent. I'd been meaning to get it checked properly, but between back-to-back sales trips and my recent divorce proceedings with Brian, I kept pushing it off. The highway stretched out empty ahead of me, one of those long rural stretches where the nearest town is 40 miles in either direction, just cornfields and darkness on both sides. The temperature gauge started creeping up around midnight, right when I was passing through the absolute middle of nowhere on Highway 169. First, it just nudged past the center mark, which happens sometimes on long drives, but within 5 minutes it was climbing toward the red zone, and I could smell that distinct burnt sweet odor of overheating coolant. I pulled over onto the shoulder, my hazard lights clicking in rhythm with my quickening heartbeat, and killed the engine before any serious damage could happen. Steam started hissing out from under the hood almost immediately, creating these ghostly white wisps in my headlight beams that dissipated into the darkness. The silence hit me like a physical weight once the engine stopped ticking and pinging as it cooled down. No cricket sounds, no wind through the corn, just absolute stillness broken only by the metallic cooling sounds of my engine. I checked my phone and of course 0 bars, not even emergency service, which seemed impossible. But there it was, that dreaded no service message mocking me from the screen. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes, door locked, windows cracked just enough to keep the interior from fogging up, scrolling through useless offline apps on my phone just to have something to do with my nervous energy. Every few minutes I'd pop the hood release and walk around to check if the steam had stopped, but the engine was still way too hot to even think about removing the radiator cap. The owner's manual in my glove compartment said to wait at least 30 minutes before attempting anything, and even then, only if you had coolant or water to add, which of course I didn't, because why would I ever think to keep emergency supplies in my car like a responsible adult? That stretch of 169 was notorious for being empty at night, mostly used by truckers during daylight hours and locals who knew better than to drive it after dark. I'd passed maybe 3 vehicles in the last hour before breaking down, and that was during the relatively busy midnight hour. Now, approaching 1 in the morning, the chances of seeing another car were getting slimmer by the minute. The first hint of hope came as a faint glow on the horizon behind me, barely visible in my side mirror, just a slight brightening of the darkness that meant headlights were coming from several miles away. I actually said thank God out loud to myself and started rehearsing what I'd say to whoever stopped, already planning to offer them $50, just to follow me to the nearest gas station once my car cooled down enough to limp there. The lights grew steadily brighter, taking forever to close the distance, which made sense given how flat and straight the highway was in that area. As they got closer, I could make out that it was something big, definitely not a regular car, maybe a pickup truck or an SUV based on how high and widely spaced the headlights were. I turned on my phone's flashlight and got out of the car, standing by my open driver's door and getting ready to wave them down, figuring nobody could miss a woman standing next to a car with hazards going on an otherwise empty highway. The vehicle started slowing down about a quarter mile away, which gave me this huge wave of relief, because for a second there, I thought they might just blow past me like I wasn't even there. But then it kept slowing down, way more than necessary, crawling forward at maybe 5 miles per hour for the last 100 yards or so. The headlights were blinding me directly now, making it impossible to see anything about the vehicle itself except that it was definitely a van, one of those tall commercial types, maybe white or light gray from what I could glimpse around the light glare. It finally came to a complete stop directly across from me in the opposite lane, engine running rough and loud, like it needed a new muffler or maybe had some kind of modification to make it sound more aggressive. The headlights stayed on full brightness, pointed right at me and my car, and I had to shield my eyes with my hand while waiting for someone to roll down a window or open a door. But nothing happened. The van just sat there maybe 15 feet away, engine rumbling in this deep, irregular rhythm that seemed to vibrate through the empty highway and into my chest. 30 seconds passed, then a minute, and still no movement from the van, no dimming of the lights, no window rolling down, nothing. I couldn't see through the windshield at all because of how the headlights were angled and how they were reflecting off my car's windows and chrome, creating this wall of harsh white light between us. I waved my phone flashlight in a friendly greeting motion and called out, "Hey, thanks for stopping," but my voice sounded thin and weak against the rumbling engine noise. When there was still no response, I took a few steps forward, thinking maybe they couldn't hear me, but then stopped myself because something about the whole situation was starting to feel wrong in a way I couldn't quite define. The logical part of my brain was saying they were probably just being cautious, maybe an older person who was scared to get out and help a stranger at night, or possibly someone on the phone trying to call for help on my behalf. But the primitive part of my brain, that ancient survival instinct we all have, was screaming at me to get back in my car right now. I slowly backed toward my Camry, keeping my eyes on the van even though I couldn't see anything useful through the light glare, and slid back into the driver's seat without turning my back on the other vehicle. My fingers found the door lock button and I pressed it, hearing all 4 locks engage with a solid thunk that made me feel marginally safer, even though I knew how useless those locks would be if someone really wanted to get in. The van's engine note changed slightly, revving up a bit like someone was pressing the gas pedal while in park, and then I saw something that made my whole body go rigid with fear. The driver's door was opening, just a crack at first, maybe 2 or 3 inches, but enough for me to see that the interior dome light had been removed or disabled because no light came on inside. The door stayed open like that for at least 10 seconds, just barely ajar, and I could swear I saw movement in that dark gap, like someone was watching me through the opening. Then, just as suddenly as it had opened, the door pulled shut with a solid thump that I could hear even over the engine noise. My car key was already in my hand, and I shoved it into the ignition, turning it even though I knew the engine was still too hot and probably wouldn't start without causing serious damage. The starter motor whined in protest and the engine tried to turn over but couldn't quite catch, just making these horrible grinding sounds that I knew meant expensive repairs, even if I got out of this situation. The temperature gauge was still showing way too high, but I didn't care anymore because that van door opening had changed everything about what this was. I tried starting it again, pumping the gas pedal like that would somehow help, and this time the engine caught for maybe 2 seconds before dying with a shudder that shook the whole car. Through all of this, the van hadn't moved an inch, just sat there with its headlights burning into my retinas. But now I noticed something else that made my situation even worse. There was another set of headlights in my rearview mirror, coming up from behind me, moving slowly just like the van had done. This second vehicle, another large one from what I could tell, crept up and stopped about the same distance behind me as the van was in front, boxing me in completely on this narrow shoulder. Its headlights were on high beam too, filling my car with light from both directions, making me feel like I was on a stage under spotlights. I grabbed my phone again, desperately trying to get any signal, even just one bar to make an emergency call, but still nothing. I was holding it up toward the window, moving it around, trying to catch any possible signal, when I heard car doors opening, not slamming shut but opening from both vehicles at the same time. Through the blinding light I could barely make out shapes, 2 figures from the van in front and at least one from whatever was behind me, all moving slowly and deliberately, not rushing but not hesitating either. They were staying just outside the direct beams of their own headlights, keeping to the shadows at the edges, where I could only see silhouettes and suggestions of movement. One of them walked up to my passenger side window and just stood there, close enough that I could see they were wearing dark clothes, maybe jeans and a jacket, but their face was completely hidden in shadow above my window line. They didn't knock, didn't try the handle, just stood perfectly still like they were waiting for something. Another figure appeared at my driver's side, same distance away, same completely motionless stance, and I realized they were positioned so I couldn't open either door without hitting them. The third one, and now I could see there was definitely a fourth one too, circled around to the front and back of my car. I was completely surrounded, and they were all just standing there in absolute silence, not making any demands, not trying to communicate, just waiting. The only sound was the 2 engines idling, and my own ragged breathing that was fogging up the windows despite my efforts to control it. I had my phone ready to use as a weapon if needed, which sounds ridiculous now, but at the time it was literally the only thing I had besides my car keys. Then one of them, the one by my passenger window, lifted their hand and tapped on the glass with one knuckle. Just twice. Soft and almost polite. When I didn't respond, staying frozen in my seat with my fingers white-knuckled around my phone, they tapped again. Same pattern, same weird gentleness. The figure on my driver's side did the exact same thing at the exact same moment. 2 soft taps in perfect synchronization, like they had rehearsed it. That's when I knew this wasn't random, wasn't just some group of criminals who happened upon a broken-down car. This was planned, coordinated, and they had probably done this before. My mind started racing through every option, ramming the van in front even with an overheating engine, trying to drive through the cornfield, screaming even though nobody would hear me, anything to break out of this trap. But before I could act on any of these desperate ideas, all 4 of them stepped back at the same time. Just one step, still maintaining their positions but giving me just enough space that I could theoretically open a door. The one in front raised their hand and made a rolling motion, like they were telling me to start my car and leave. I didn't need to be told twice and turned the key again, begging the universe to let my car start just this once, promising I'd never skip maintenance again, never ignore warning sounds, never drive alone at night through empty highways. The engine turned over once, twice, and then miraculously caught and held, running rough and making terrible sounds but actually running. The temperature gauge immediately shot to the red zone, but I shifted into drive anyway, ready to destroy the engine if it meant getting away from these people. But when I pressed the gas pedal, the car lurched forward maybe 3 feet and then died completely, all the dashboard lights going dark, even the hazard lights clicking off into nothing. The electrical system was completely dead, and this time I knew it wasn't coming back. The 2 vehicles that had trapped me suddenly killed their headlights too, plunging everything into absolute darkness. And for a moment I couldn't see anything at all, couldn't hear anything except my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. My phone screen was the only light source now, casting this weak blue glow inside my car, and I held it up trying to see what was happening outside. The 4 figures were gone, or at least I couldn't see them anymore, and for maybe 30 seconds nothing moved, nothing happened, just me sitting in my dead car in pitch blackness on an empty highway. Then both vehicles started up again simultaneously, their engines roaring to life, but still no lights. Oh. I heard them pulling away, one forward and one backward, their tires crunching on the gravel shoulder. And within seconds, they were accelerating away in opposite directions, driving completely dark on the highway. I sat there shaking, unable to process what had just happened. Still expecting them to come back, still waiting for something horrible that never came. It took me another 10 minutes before I could make myself get out of the car and start walking, using my phone's flashlight to navigate the shoulder, constantly checking behind me every few steps. I walked for almost 2 hours before a state trooper found me, and when I told him what happened, he just nodded like he'd heard this before, and said there had been similar reports from that stretch of 169 over the past few months. They never found any evidence of who these people were, and the trooper told me I was lucky because 2 other drivers who'd broken down on that same stretch in the previous year hadn't been found for days, both of them discovered in their locked cars in various states of psychological trauma, unable or unwilling to explain what had happened to them during the missing time between their breakdown and when they were discovered. The investigators think it's some kind of group that targets vulnerable motorists, maybe doing it for intimidation, maybe for something worse that I was lucky enough to avoid by my car dying completely. I had to get therapy to deal with the nightmares, and even now, 2 years later, I can't drive at night anymore without having a panic attack. I take flights whenever possible, or I plan my routes to only drive during daylight hours with plenty of people around. What haunts me most isn't what happened, but what didn't happen, and what might have happened if my car hadn't died completely, or if I'd gotten out when they were standing around me. Sometimes I wonder if they're still out there on that stretch of highway, waiting for the next broken down car, executing their strange ritual for reasons I'll never understand. The Peterbilt's engine had been making this weird rattling noise for the past 100 miles. Nothing serious, but enough to keep me on edge during that November 2023 haul. My 39-year-old body already felt like it belonged to someone twice my age. Too many years bouncing around in truck cabs, eating gas station food, sleeping in rest areas. I was moving agricultural equipment from Omaha to Denver, a route that usually took me about 10 hours if everything went smooth. Nancy had packed those beef sandwiches she always makes, the ones with the horseradish spread that burns just right, wrapped tight in aluminum foil. I kept thinking about getting home for my daughter Megan's basketball game on Saturday morning. She'd been practicing her free throws all month, and I'd promised to be there this time. The Nebraska rest stop near mile marker 287 sits about 40 miles west of Grand Island. One of those newer facilities built with federal funding that actually has decent lighting and those vending machines that never eat your dollar bills. I pulled in around 3 in the morning, needing to stretch my legs and grab some coffee to push through the last leg to Denver. The parking lot surprised me. At least 15 cars scattered across the regular vehicle section, way more than you'd expect at this hour. Sedans, SUVs, a couple of minivans, different colors and states on the license plates. Sometimes you hit these random clusters of travelers, maybe all avoiding some weather system or construction zone further up the highway. The truck parking area was nearly empty though, just me and 2 other rigs parked way at the far end, their running lights glowing orange in the darkness. I grabbed my jacket from behind the seat, one of those thick Carhartt ones with the quilted lining that Nancy bought me 2 Christmases ago, and headed toward the main building. The cold hit different that night, sharp and dry, the kind that makes your nose hairs freeze up instantly. As I walked past those parked cars, something started bothering me, like when you're trying to remember if you locked your front door but can't quite recall. Every single vehicle had frost on the windshields, that thin layer you get when cars sit for a while in cold weather. But underneath the frost, the glass looked foggy, like they'd all been running recently with people inside. The parking lot lights made everything look washed out and yellowish, creating these long shadows that stretched between the vehicles like dark fingers reaching across the asphalt. The automatic doors whooshed open, and I stepped into that artificial warmth that always smells like old coffee, and industrial cleaner. The place was dead quiet, except for the electrical hum of the vending machines lined up against the far wall, their lights flickering slightly like they always do in these places. I headed straight for the men's room, my boots echoing on those polished concrete floors they put in all these rest stops now. The bathroom door was propped wide open with one of those yellow wet floor cones, but the floors were bone dry. Inside, all the faucets were dripping in this weird synchronized rhythm, like someone had turned them all on just enough to leak at the exact same rate. The mirrors had condensation on them, foggy patches right about face height, as if a bunch of people had been standing there breathing on the glass not too long ago. I did my business quick, that uneasy feeling crawling up my spine like cold fingers. When I went to wash my hands, the soap dispensers were all empty, every single one of them. But there were fresh soap suds still sliding down the sides of the sinks, pink foam from that cheap industrial soap they use. The paper towel dispensers had been pulled open, brown paper streaming down to the floor in long strips, like someone had yanked them out in a hurry. I dried my hands on my jeans and got out of there. Back in the main area, I noticed the information rack near the entrance. All those tourism brochures for local attractions and hotels had been emptied out, the pamphlets scattered across the floor in a trail leading toward the exit doors. But what really got me was the vending machines. Every single item had been selected, the metal coils all turned to their endpoints, but nothing had dropped down. Bags of chips, candy bars, bottles of soda, all hanging there at impossible angles, defying gravity. Something made me walk over to the windows facing the parking lot. Maybe just to confirm what my brain was already screaming at me to acknowledge. Those 15 cars sat there under the yellow lights, and now I could see inside them better. Every single driver's seat was pushed all the way back, like whoever had been driving was either really tall or had needed to get out in a hurry without taking time to adjust anything. The doors, I hadn't noticed it walking in, but now I could see. They were all slightly ajar, not wide open, just cracked maybe an inch or two, interior dome lights off despite the doors being open. That's when I saw the keys. Every single vehicle had its keys still in the ignition, glinting under the parking lot lights. Some of them had those heavy keychains people use, rabbit's feet and bottle openers and little photos in plastic frames, all just dangling there. My mouth went dry and I could hear my own heartbeat thudding in my ears like a drum. I backed away from the window and started moving toward the exit, trying to look casual even though nobody was around to see me. The coffee could wait. Hell, everything could wait. I just needed to get back to my truck and get out of there. But as I pushed through those automatic doors, the cold air hit me along with something else. A smell like burning rubber mixed with something sweet. Almost like caramel, but wrong somehow. Synthetic. The parking lot seemed darker now, even though nothing had changed, and I could hear this low humming sound, barely audible, like 100 people humming the same note just below the range of normal hearing. My boots crunched on something as I walked. Broken pieces of cell phones, dozens of them, scattered across the asphalt like someone had taken a hammer to a phone store display. I picked up my pace, almost jogging now toward my Peterbilt, fumbling for my keys with numb fingers. The two other trucks I'd seen earlier were still there, but now I noticed their doors were open too. Cabs dark, no sign of the drivers. As I passed that cluster of abandoned cars, I could see more details that made my gut clench. Purses left on passenger seats, coffee cups still steaming in cup holders, a baby's car seat with the straps undone and hanging loose. One minivan had a DVD player still running in the back, some cartoon playing on repeat, the glow from the screen casting blue shadows through the frosted windows. The Nebraska license plates, Iowa, Colorado, Wyoming, all different places, but every single car had the same thing, a parking receipt from this rest stop tucked under the windshield wiper, all time stamped within the last hour. How the hell do 15 different groups of people all disappear within an hour? I reached my truck and grabbed the door handle, ready to climb up into safety, when I heard it, the distinct sound of car engines turning over, one after another, like dominoes falling. But nobody was starting them. I turned around slowly. my breath coming out in quick white puffs in the cold air, and watched as every single abandoned car in that parking lot came to life. Not roaring to life, just idling, that low purr of engines warming up. The headlights stayed off though, and the cars just sat there running in the dark like they were waiting for something. Then I noticed the steam starting to rise from their exhaust pipes, thick white clouds in the freezing air, but the smoke wasn't drifting away like it should. It was moving sideways, creeping along the ground toward my truck like morning fog. Except fog doesn't move with purpose, doesn't seem to reach for you. That's when the radios turned on. Every car radio, all at once, but not playing music or talk shows. It was voices, dozens of different voices all talking at the same time but not to each other, like recorded conversations played simultaneously. I could make out fragments as I stood there paralyzed. Someone ordering lunch, a woman singing happy birthday, a man arguing about a football game, a child asking to stop for the bathroom. Normal conversations, everyday stuff, but all cut up and overlapping in this horrible cacophony that made my teeth ache. The smell got stronger, that burnt rubber and fake sweet combination that made me want to gag. And underneath all those voices from the radios, I could hear something else. Breathing. Synchronized breathing, like when you're in a quiet room and suddenly become aware of your own breath. Except this was coming from inside those empty cars, from seats that I could clearly see had nobody in them. My hands finally found the truck door handle, and I yanked myself up into the cab, slamming the door behind me hard enough to rattle the whole vehicle. My fingers fumbled with the keys, missing the ignition twice before finally getting them in. The Peterbilt roared to life, that familiar diesel rumble that usually comforted me now sounding too loud, too obvious. Through my windshield, I watched as every single headlight in that parking lot flicked on at the exact same moment. All of them pointed directly at my truck. Not just the front headlights, the brake lights, the reverse lights, the fog lights. Every possible light on those vehicles blazed to life, bathing my cab in this harsh, blinding white and red glow that made shadows dance across my dashboard like living things. The voices on the radios got louder, more frantic, overlapping into this wall of human sound that penetrated right through my closed windows. And then, just as I slammed the truck into gear, I saw them in my side mirrors, people standing behind each car, perfectly still, all facing my truck. But when I turned to look directly, nothing. Check the mirror again. They were there. Look back. Empty parking lot. I gunned it out of there, probably taking that exit turn faster than any 18-wheeler should. Tires screaming against the asphalt. In my rearview mirror, those lights followed me, not the cars, just the lights, staying at the exact same distance no matter how hard I pushed the accelerator. They stayed with me for maybe 5 miles down Interstate 80 before suddenly cutting out all at once, leaving me in complete darkness, except for my own headlights cutting through the Nebraska night. I didn't stop driving until I hit Denver. Didn't even pull over to check that rattling sound in the engine that had gotten worse during my escape. When I finally got to the delivery point and told my dispatcher about what happened, he laughed and said, I must have dozed off and had a nightmare, but I know what I saw. I know those people in the mirrors were real. And I know that 3 days later, when I looked up news for that area, there were reports of 17 vehicles found abandoned at that same rest stop, all with their engines running, keys in the ignition, and no sign of the drivers or passengers. The reports said it was probably human trafficking or some coordinated crime, but they never found anyone, never found any bodies, never found any explanation. I never took that route again. Told my dispatcher I'd quit before driving through Nebraska after dark, and I meant it. Nancy thinks I had some kind of breakdown, maybe a panic attack from too many hours on the road. And I let her believe that because it's easier than trying to explain what really happened. But sometimes, when I'm driving at night on any empty highway, I'll catch a glimpse of headlights in my mirror that seem to be following at the exact same distance for too long, and I have to pull over at the next truck stop, wait it out with other drivers around, pretending to check my logs or grab coffee until the feeling passes. I still drive for a living. Bills don't pay themselves. But I plan my routes different now, always making sure I'm near populated areas when 3 in the morning rolls around. And I never, ever stop at rest areas when there are too many cars, but no people. That's the thing that still keeps me up some nights, turning it over in my mind like a puzzle with missing pieces. Where did all those people go? What were those things I saw standing behind the cars that only existed in reflections? About a month ago, another trucker named Glenn told me something at a Flying J outside Denver that made my blood turn to ice water. He said his cousin drives that same stretch of Interstate 80, and one night around 3 in the morning, he saw a bunch of abandoned trucks at that same rest stop. Big rigs like mine, doors open, engines running, nobody around. But here's the thing that really got me. Glenn's cousin said he saw someone in his mirror walking between the trucks, checking each cab like they were looking for something specific. When he turned to look directly, the parking lot was empty. But in the mirror, clear as day, the figure kept searching, kept moving from truck to truck with this methodical patience that made him floor it out of there without looking back. We compared dates. It was exactly 1 month after my experience, down to the day. Glenn's cousin won't drive that route anymore either. Makes you wonder how many of us have seen things at that rest stop, how many have kept quiet because nobody would believe us anyway. All I know is that place isn't right. And whatever's happening there, it's still happening. Still hunting, still collecting. My headlights caught her in that strange way where everything else disappears into darkness. She was standing on the shoulder of Route 47, both arms raised high above her head, waving in these big, sweeping motions like she was trying to flag down a plane instead of a car. The dashboard clock showed 3:17 a.m., and I'd been driving for maybe 20 minutes since leaving the hospital parking garage, my scrub still smelling like disinfectant, and that weird metallic scent that clings to you after 12 hours in the respiratory unit. Being 29 means you think you're invincible, that nothing bad can happen to you, especially when you've dealt with life and death situations all night. But seeing this woman out there, completely alone on this stretch of highway that runs through nothing but abandoned warehouses and overgrown fields, made something in my chest tighten up. I remember gripping the steering wheel harder, my knuckles going white while I debated what to do. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to keep driving, to call 911 once I got further down the road, let someone else deal with it. But she looked so desperate, and I kept thinking about my sister Katie, how she'd broken down on a similar road last year, and nobody stopped for 3 hours. The woman was wearing dark clothes, a navy blazer that looked expensive even from a distance, nice jeans, not the kind of outfit you'd expect from someone dangerous. Her blonde hair was shoulder length, neat despite the wind from passing semis, so I did what I probably shouldn't have done. I slowed down, checked my mirrors for any other cars lurking nearby, and pulled over about 50 feet ahead of her, keeping my engine running and my phone in my lap with 911 already dialed but not yet called. She jogged up to my passenger window, and I only rolled it down about 3 inches, just enough to hear her speak. Up close, she was maybe 45, with one of those faces that probably looked younger in better lighting. Her makeup was perfect though, which struck me as odd for someone stranded at 3 in the morning. No smeared mascara from crying, no signs of distress on her face at all. She smiled at me, this calm, almost serene expression that didn't match the frantic waving from moments before. "Thank you so much for stopping," she said, her voice steady and pleasant, like we were meeting at a coffee shop instead of on a dark highway. My car broke down about a mile back, and my phone died. I just need a ride to the next exit where I can call someone. Her explanation made sense, but something about her demeanor set off every alarm bell in my head. Still, I unlocked the door. God knows why. Maybe because turning away someone who looked so normal, so put together, felt cruel. She slid into the passenger seat with this fluid grace, closing the door gently behind her, and immediately the car filled with her perfume, something floral and heavy that reminded me of funeral homes. I pulled back onto the highway, accelerating slowly while trying to make conversation to ease my nerves. Asked her what happened to her car, and she said something vague about the engine making weird noises before it just stopped. Asked where she was headed before breaking down, and she said she was visiting family but didn't specify where. Every answer was like that, polite, reasonable on the surface, but completely empty of any real information. The next exit was only about 10 miles away, but those were going to be the longest 10 miles of my life. I kept glancing at her in my peripheral vision, and she just sat there, hands folded neatly in her lap, staring straight ahead through the windshield with that same subtle smile playing at the corners of her mouth. About 5 minutes into the drive, I reached over to adjust my rearview mirror because a semi was coming up behind us with its high beams on. That's when I noticed it. The side mirror on the passenger side showed the empty seat, just the beige fabric of my car's interior, the seatbelt hanging loose, nothing else. But she was right there. I could see her in my peripheral vision, could smell that overwhelming perfume, could hear her breathing in this measured, deliberate way. My brain tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was the angle, maybe the darkness was playing tricks, maybe I was more exhausted than I thought. I adjusted the mirror slightly, tilted my head different ways, but no matter what I did, the reflection showed an empty seat. My heart started hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears, this thick, wet pounding that made it hard to focus on the road. "Is everything all right?" she asked, and her voice sounded different now, lower, with this weird echo quality like she was speaking from the bottom of a well. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and forced myself to look straight ahead, told her everything was fine, just tired from my shift. She made this humming sound, not quite agreement, not quite anything really, just this low vibration that seemed to fill the entire car. The temperature dropped suddenly, or maybe that was just me going cold with fear, but I could see my breath coming out in little puffs even though it was August, and the AC wasn't even on that high. I started doing the math in my head. 5 more miles to the exit, maybe 6 minutes if I sped up a little. But when I pressed harder on the gas pedal, the speedometer didn't budge. We were still going exactly 55, no matter how hard I pressed down. That's when she started talking, not to me exactly, but just talking in this monotone voice about the strangest things. "People leave pieces of themselves everywhere they go," she said, her head still facing forward, never turning to look at me. "In their cars, in their homes, in the places they work. Little fragments of who they are, what they've done, what they're going to do. Sometimes those pieces get picked up by others. Sometimes they get carried forward." I had no idea how to respond to that, so I just kept driving, watching the mile markers pass by with agonizing slowness. She continued, "You left something at the hospital tonight. Not equipment, not belongings, something else. And now you're carrying something that isn't yours." My mouth went completely dry. I wanted to ask her what she meant, wanted to scream at her to get out of my car, but my voice wouldn't work. It was like my throat had sealed itself shut. The exit sign finally came into view. Exit 42, with a gas station logo and a promise of food and lodging. Relief washed over me so intensely that I almost sobbed. I put on my turn signal, started to ease into the exit lane, and that's when she placed her hand on the dashboard. Not on my arm, not reaching for the wheel, just flat against the dashboard. Her hand was wrong. The fingers were too long, bent at angles that shouldn't have been possible, and the skin had this translucent quality where I could see dark veins pulsing underneath. "Not this exit," she said calmly. "The next one." But there was no next exit for another 15 miles. I knew this highway like the back of my hand, had driven it hundreds of times. My foot moved to the brake anyway, started to slow down for the exit, and she made this clicking sound with her tongue, sharp and disapproving like you'd make at a misbehaving dog. I jerked the wheel hard to the right, tires screaming as I veered into the exit lane despite her protests. The moment I did, she went completely silent. Not just quiet. It was like all sound in the car had been sucked out, creating this vacuum that made my ears pop painfully. I risked a glance at the passenger seat and found it empty. Completely. Absolutely empty. The seatbelt was still buckled somehow, stretched across nothing, and that overwhelming perfume smell had vanished instantly. But the passenger door was hanging wide open, swinging back and forth even though we were moving at 40 miles an hour. The interior light was on, illuminating the seat, and there was something lying there. A phone. At first I thought she'd left her phone behind, but as I pulled into the gas station parking lot with shaking legs, I realized it looked exactly like mine. Same case, same cracked corner from when I dropped it last month. Same hospital parking sticker on the back. I slammed on the brakes under the bright canopy lights of the gas station, my real phone still in the cup holder where I'd left it. But this other phone, this duplicate, was lit up and active. The screen showed my GPS app tracking my exact location in real time, following the little blue dot that represented my car. The location history showed everywhere I'd been that night. The hospital, the route I'd taken, even the spot where I'd picked her up. But there were other locations too, places I'd never been, timestamps for the future, for later today, tomorrow, next week. Places called Riverside Memorial Gardens, Bennett Funeral Home, plots with numbers instead of names. My throat constricted as I picked up the phone with trembling fingers, and that's when I saw the last destination programmed into it, set for 4:47 a.m., just 20 minutes from now. It was my apartment address, but the label on it simply said, "Collection Point." I threw both phones onto the passenger floor and ran into the gas station, practically colliding with the glass doors in my panic. The teenager behind the counter looked up from his phone, startled by this woman in wrinkled scrubs bursting in like a maniac. I must have looked insane, trying to explain that someone had been in my car but wasn't really there, that she'd left a phone that was mine but wasn't mine. He just stared at me, suggested maybe I should call the police, which I did. 2 officers showed up about 10 minutes later, probably expecting to deal with a psychiatric case or someone high on something. They checked my car, found the duplicate phone right where I'd thrown it, and their expressions changed immediately. Turns out, they'd been getting similar reports all week. Women picking up other women on various highways around the state, always late at night, always with the same story about a broken-down car. The passengers would vanish, leaving behind these duplicate phones with disturbing GPS data. 3 of the women who'd reported it had died within days. Sudden brain aneurysms, unexplained organ failure, things that shouldn't happen to healthy people in their 20s and 30s. The officers took the duplicate phone as evidence and followed me home, insisted on checking my apartment before I went in. Everything looked normal, nothing out of place, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. I called in sick for the next week, stayed with my sister Katie in another state, trying to make sense of what happened. The duplicate phone was never explained. The police said the GPS data was impossible, that the phone shouldn't have been able to predict future locations like that. They never found any woman matching the description I gave, no abandoned cars on that stretch of highway. 6 days later, I got a call from the police. Another woman had picked up the same passenger, or something that looked like her, on a completely different highway 3 states away. That woman didn't make it to the gas station. They found her car on the side of the road, engine still running, both doors open. 2 phones in the front seat showing the same impossible GPS data. She was in the driver's seat, unconscious but alive, and when she woke up in the hospital, she had no memory of the last 3 years of her life. Just gone, like they'd been deleted. I still work at the hospital, still drive home late at night, but I never stop for anyone anymore. And sometimes, when I'm checking my GPS, I see locations I've never been to flash across the screen for just a second before disappearing. Places I hope I'll never have to visit, at least not while I'm still breathing. "5 months ago, turning 36 had made me realize my life consisted of endless miles of asphalt and the hum of 18 wheels against pavement. Trucking paid the bills, kept me moving from state to state, hauling everything from furniture to frozen goods. That particular week in early May, had me driving a load of electronics from Phoenix to Chicago, a route that usually took me through some pretty desolate stretches of highway. My marriage had fallen apart 6 months prior, and honestly, the solitude of the road felt like exactly what I needed. The cab of my Peterbilt had become more of a home than my actual apartment back in Tucson. That night, the one that still makes me check my mirrors more than necessary, started like any other long haul through the desert. The fuel gauge had been hovering near empty for the last 20 miles, and finding a station open at 2 in the morning on Highway 89 wasn't exactly easy. When the faded Shell sign finally appeared through the darkness, glowing like a beacon against the black desert sky, relief washed over me. The place looked ancient, one of those stations that probably hadn't been renovated since the 70s, with just 2 pumps and a small convenience store attached. No other vehicles sat in the lot, which wasn't unusual for that hour and location. The fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered, casting an uneven glow across the cracked concrete. I pulled the rig in carefully, mindful of the tight space, and killed the engine. The sudden silence felt heavy, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal and the distant hum of the store's ancient air conditioning unit, struggling against the desert heat. I grabbed my wallet from the center console and climbed down from the cab, my joints protesting after 4 hours of straight driving. The desert air hit me immediately, still warm despite the early hour, carrying that distinctive smell of creosote and dust. My boots crunched against loose gravel as I walked to the pump, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. Through the store window, I could make out the silhouette of someone behind the counter, barely visible through the grime-covered glass. The pump itself looked older than me, one of those analog models where you could actually hear the fuel rushing through the hose. I started filling up, leaning against the truck while the numbers slowly climbed on the display. 40 gallons, 50, 60. Big rigs drink fuel like nothing else, and this would probably cost me close to $300. Inside the store, the clerk hadn't moved once since I'd arrived. Even from outside, I could tell something was wrong with his posture, the way he stood rigid behind that counter, his head slightly tilted like he was listening for something. The fluorescent light above him kept cutting out for split seconds, making him appear and disappear like frames missing from an old film reel. When the pump finally clicked off at 78 gallons, I hung up the nozzle and headed toward the door. The closer I got, the more details I could make out through the window. Young guy, maybe early 20s, wearing a faded red Shell uniform that hung loose on his thin frame. His face was pale, almost gray under those harsh lights, and his eyes kept darting to the door, then back to the counter, then to the door again. The bell above the entrance gave a weak chime as I pushed inside, and the kid practically jumped out of his skin. "Just the diesel," I said, trying to keep my voice casual despite the weird vibe in the place. The store smelled like old coffee and something else, something metallic that reminded me of blood, but could have been rusty pipes. The kid nodded quickly, his fingers trembling as he punched numbers into the ancient register. His name tag read Aaron in faded letters, and up close I could see dark circles under his eyes, like he hadn't slept in days. Behind him, a security monitor showed grainy footage of the parking lot, but the screen kept jumping and distorting, making it impossible to see anything clearly. $312.47, Aaron whispered, his voice barely audible. His eyes flicked to the door again, then to me, then back to the door. I handed him my credit card, and when our fingers brushed during the exchange, his skin felt ice cold despite the warmth of the night. While he ran the card, I noticed his other hand gripping the edge of the counter so hard his knuckles had turned white. The receipt printer screeched to life, making him flinch violently. Every sound seemed to terrify him. The hum of the refrigerators, the buzz of the lights, even his own breathing, which came in short, shallow gasps. "You traveling alone?" he asked suddenly, his eyes meeting mine for the first time. Before I could answer, he leaned forward slightly, glancing toward the door again. "Don't matter, just, when you leave, drive fast. Don't stop for nothing." He pushed the receipt across the counter with shaking fingers. I was about to ask what he meant when he grabbed my wrist. His grip was desperate, urgent. "And don't open that door again," he whispered, his voice cracking. Once you're out, just go, please." The intensity in his eyes made my chest tighten. This wasn't some joke or local trying to mess with an outsider. I pulled my hand back, pocketed the receipt, and headed for the door without another word. Whatever was happening here, the kid's fear was real enough to make me want to get back on the road immediately. The bell chimed again as I pushed outside, and I heard Aaron let out a sound behind me, something between a whimper and a prayer. The walk back to my truck felt longer than before, the darkness beyond the station's lights seeming to press in from all sides. I climbed up into the cab quickly, locked the doors, and started the engine. The diesel rumbled to life, a comforting sound after the strangeness inside that store. I was just putting the truck in gear when I heard it. A soft knocking on the glass of the passenger door. 3 deliberate taps, patient and measured. My head snapped toward the sound, but the parking lot lights didn't reach that side of the cab. All I could see in the window was blackness. Then a voice, clear despite the running engine, came from outside the passenger door. "Come on, Richard, open up. We need to talk." My entire body went rigid. Richard. That voice had just said my name. My actual name that I hadn't told anyone at this stop, that wasn't on any paperwork visible in the cab, that the kid inside definitely hadn't used. The credit card I'd paid with was a company card under the trucking firm's name, not mine. My CDL was tucked away in my wallet. There was absolutely no way anyone here could know my name. The knock came again, still gentle, almost friendly. "Richard, I know you can hear me. Just crack the window, 5 minutes, that's all I need." The voice sounded normal, masculine, maybe middle-aged, with no accent I could place. But there was something underneath the words, something that made every instinct scream at me not to look, not to respond, just drive. I slammed the truck into first gear and started rolling forward, my heart hammering against my ribs. Through the side mirror, I caught a glimpse of movement. A figure stepping back from the truck, tall and thin, wearing what looked like a dark suit. Who wears a suit in the middle of the desert at 2 in the morning? The figure didn't chase after the truck, just stood there watching as I pulled away. "Richard, you're making this harder than it needs to be," the voice called out, somehow still audible over the diesel engine. "I'll be seeing you at the next stop, mile marker 277. You know you have to stop there." My throat went dry. Mile marker 277 was the way station, mandatory for all commercial vehicles. If I skipped it, I'd have Dati on my ass within hours, probably lose my CDL. But how did this person know my route? How did they know I'd have to stop there? I hit the highway doing 70, way over the limit for a loaded rig, but I didn't care. In the rearview mirror, the gas station lights faded into the distance, swallowed by the desert darkness. My phone, mounted on the dashboard, showed 2:23 a.m. The way station was maybe 40 miles ahead, less than an hour at this speed. I kept checking the mirrors, expecting to see headlights following, but the road remained empty. Just me, the yellow lines, and miles of nothing. Then I noticed something that made my grip tighten on the wheel. The GPS on my phone was showing my name at the top of the screen, Richard's route, something I'd never programmed, never seen before. I reached over to check the settings, and that's when I saw the recent search history wasn't mine. Addresses I'd never looked up. My ex-wife's new apartment in Flagstaff, my mother's nursing home in Albuquerque, my daughter's college dorm at ASU. Places this person, whoever they were, wanted me to know they knew about. The mile markers counted down like a timer on a bomb. 251, 250, 249, each one bringing me closer to that way station where he said he'd be waiting. I tried calling 911, but my phone showed no service despite having full bars just minutes before. The radio in the truck produced only static, no matter which channel I tried. Even the CB, usually full of late-night chatter from other truckers, was dead silent. It felt like I was driving through a bubble, cut off from the rest of the world. At mile marker 265, I made a decision. There was a truck stop at exit 38, a big flying J that would have people, witnesses, maybe even security. I could park there, wait until daylight, figure out what to do. But as I approached the exit, my foot wouldn't move to the brake pedal. I pressed down hard, but nothing happened. The pedal felt normal, had resistance, but the truck kept maintaining exactly 70 miles per hour. The steering wheel turned freely. I could change lanes, but I couldn't slow down, couldn't take the exit. Panic started creeping up my spine as I watched the Flying J pass by in a blur of lights. Whatever was happening, whoever this person was, they had control of my truck somehow. The electronics, the brakes, probably the accelerator too. Modern trucks are all computer-controlled, and someone with the right knowledge could hack into the systems. But doing it while the truck was moving, from a distance? That was something else entirely. Mile marker 277 appeared in my headlights like a tombstone. The weigh station sat just ahead, its inspection lanes empty, the office building dark except for a single light in the front window. As my truck began to slow on its own, finally responding to my desperate pumping of the brakes, I saw him. The same tall figure in the dark suit standing next to a black sedan parked beside the scale house. He raised one hand in a casual wave, like we were old friends meeting for coffee. My truck rolled to a stop exactly where it needed to for the weigh-in, and the engine died without me turning the key. The man walked toward my truck with measured steps, his face becoming clearer under the overhead lights. Mid-40s, clean-shaven, unremarkable features except for his eyes. They were the palest blue I'd ever seen, almost white. He stopped at my door and knocked 3 times, the same patient rhythm from before. "Richard, please step out of the vehicle. We have business to discuss regarding your cargo." My cargo? I was hauling electronics, nothing special, just TVs and computers for a Best Buy distribution center. Through the side mirror, I watched him pull out what looked like a small tablet, its screen glowing green in the darkness. "Your manifest says electronics," he continued, his voice carrying perfectly through the closed door. "But we both know there's an extra package in there, serial number X74429. You weren't supposed to know about it, but plans have changed." I had no idea what he was talking about, but something in his tone made me check the sleeper compartment behind my seat. There, wedged between my duffel bag and the back wall, was a metal briefcase I'd never seen before, secured with electronic locks, a small red light blinking steadily on its surface. The man must have seen my expression change because he smiled, a thin stretching of lips that didn't reach those pale eyes. "Previous driver put it there yesterday when you stopped in Phoenix. You've been carrying it for 300 miles without knowing. Now you have 2 choices. Give me the case and drive away, forget this ever happened, go back to your life. Or refuse, and, well," he pulled out a phone, showed me the screen. Security camera footage of my daughter walking into her dorm room, time-stamped from 3 hours ago. "Rebecca's studying for her chemistry midterm right now. Room 314, Preston Hall. She keeps her window cracked because the heater runs too hot." My blood turned to ice. The decision wasn't really a choice at all. With shaking fingers, I reached back, grabbed the briefcase, and climbed down from the cab. The moment my feet hit the pavement, my truck's engine roared back to life on its own, the doors locking automatically. I handed him the case, and he examined it briefly, checking the seals, verifying something on his tablet. "Smart man," he said, already walking back to his sedan. "Your truck will start working normally once I'm gone. And Richard, don't stop at any more gas stations tonight. Take Interstate 40 straight through to Amarillo. Aaron at the Shell station. He won't make it through his shift if you go back." The sedan pulled away, disappearing into the desert darkness, and true to his word, my truck returned to normal. I drove straight through to Chicago, delivered my legitimate cargo, and never said a word about what happened. But I did check the news 3 days later. A young gas station clerk named Aaron Vasquez was found dead at a Shell station on Highway 89. Apparent heart attack, even though he was only 23 years old. That was 5 months ago, and I've since changed routes, only driving daylight hours now. Sometimes I wonder what was in that case, who that man really was, but mostly I'm just grateful my daughter is safe, still calling me every Sunday, still complaining about her dorm room being too hot. The CB radio in my Ford pickup hadn't picked up another driver for hours, just static echoing through Copper Canyon's winding roads. Sandra had called me 2 days earlier about clearing out the rest of my stuff from her place in Utah. Apparently her new boyfriend needed the garage space. Fine by me. I'd been making these furniture runs every few months since the divorce papers were signed, and this Monday night in March was just another trip with another loaded trailer swaying behind my truck. The canyon walls rose up on both sides, ancient rock formations that blocked out most of the sky, except for a narrow strip where clouds covered any trace of moonlight. My supervisor at the warehouse had given me until Wednesday to get back, which meant I could take the old canyon route instead of dealing with the interstate construction zones. 14 hours into the drive, running on nothing but gas station coffee and whatever energy drinks I could find, I kept checking my mirrors to make sure the trailer stayed centered on these sharp curves. A woman's voice suddenly cut through the static on Channel 19, each word coming through clear despite the interference around the edges. "Hello? Can anyone hear me? There's been an accident. We need help. Please, if anyone can hear this, we're just off mile marker 17, about 50 feet down the embankment on the north side. My husband's unconscious and I think his leg is broken. The car rolled twice before it stopped. Please, somebody help us." Something about her tone made my skin prickle. She sounded like she was ordering takeout, not reporting that her car had just tumbled down a mountainside. The calmness in her voice, the way she rattled off those specific details without any panic or tears, it all felt rehearsed somehow. But 40 miles from the nearest town, with these canyon walls blocking any cell signal, you couldn't just drive past someone asking for help. I grabbed the handset while navigating another hairpin turn, knowing mile marker 17 was maybe 3 miles ahead based on the last sign I'd noticed. Against every warning bell going off in my head, I pressed the talk button. "This is eastbound traffic on 19. I hear you loud and clear. I'm about 3 miles out from marker 17. Hang tight, I'm coming to help. Can you tell me what color your car is? Any injuries besides your husband?" My voice echoed back through the speaker for a second before she responded, and when she did, there was this weird delay, like she was thinking about each word before saying it. "Thank you so much for responding. It's a silver sedan, a newer model Toyota. The front end is completely smashed in. I'm okay, just some cuts and bruises, but my husband, he won't wake up. There's blood coming from his head, and his left leg is bent at an angle that doesn't look right. Please hurry." The transmission cut out with a sharp click, and I pushed harder on the accelerator, making the trailer lurch dangerously on the next curve. Something kept nagging at me, though. She never said her name, never mentioned trying to flag down other cars, never asked me to call for an ambulance once I got to somewhere with cell service. Mile marker 16 flew past my window, and I started scanning the shoulder for any sign of an accident scene, my high beams cutting through the darkness ahead. When 17 finally appeared in my headlights, I pulled over as far as I could without risking the trailer sliding off the narrow shoulder, grabbed my flashlight from under the seat, and stepped out into the cold mountain air. The silence hit me immediately. No sound of settling metal, no hiss of a damaged radiator, nothing but the tick of my own engine cooling and the wind whistling through the canyon. I walked along the guardrail, sweeping my flashlight beam down the embankment on the north side, and that's when I saw them. Fresh tire marks on the asphalt, leading straight toward the edge. The guardrail had a decent-sized dent in it, with white paint transfer that looked recent, and when I leaned over to look down, I could see broken glass scattered across the rocks about 20 feet below. But beyond that, nothing. A silver Toyota. No injured passengers, just empty darkness stretching down into the canyon. I spent the next 20 minutes climbing down that embankment, using my flashlight to check every possible spot where a car could have landed. The broken glass formed a trail that led about 50 feet down, exactly where she'd said, but then it just stopped. No skid marks in the dirt, no crushed bushes, no oil stains on the rocks, nothing to indicate a 2-ton vehicle had rolled through here. My boots kept slipping on the loose gravel, and twice I had to grab onto the scraggly pine trees growing out of the cliff face to keep from tumbling down myself. The whole time, I kept thinking about how specific her description had been, how she knew exactly how far down they'd gone. When I finally climbed back up to the road, winded and covered in dirt, I found another driver had stopped behind my truck, an older guy in a Peterbilt who'd seen my hazard lights. "Everything all right, buddy?" he called out, walking toward me with his own flashlight. "Saw your rig parked here and thought you might have trouble with that trailer." I explained about the CB call, the woman asking for help, and he got this look on his face that made my stomach tighten. "Silver Toyota, you said? Young woman, calm voice, husband with a broken leg?" The way he repeated those details, I knew he'd heard the same broadcast. "Got that call about an hour ago when I was heading westbound. Came through clear as day on 19. Thing is, I was talking to my dispatcher right after on a different channel, and he said 3 other drivers had reported the same call tonight, all at different times. Each one stopped to look, and each one found exactly what you found. Evidence of a crash, but no car." He pointed at the tire marks with his light, then at the damaged guardrail. "These marks were here when I passed through this afternoon before sunset. Whatever happened here, it wasn't tonight." We were both standing there trying to make sense of it when the CB radio in my truck crackled to life again. The woman's voice came through the open window, but this time it was different, quieter, more intimate, like she was speaking directly into the microphone. "Thank you for stopping, but you're too late. We've been down here for so long, waiting in the cold. The metal is twisted around us like fingers, and the engine block is pressing against his chest. Can you hear him breathing? Listen carefully." Then came this wet, ragged sound that made both of us step back from the truck. It went on for maybe 10 seconds, irregular and labored before cutting to dead air. The trucker grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in through my jacket. "That ain't coming from no accident scene, friend. I've pulled people from wrecks before and nobody pinned under an engine block sounds like that. We need to get out of here." But then she spoke again, and this time she said something that made every hair on my body stand straight up. "Jerome, I know you're listening. You can't leave us again, Jerome. Not like you did in Utah. Sandra tried to warn you about taking this route, didn't she? She knew what happened here. Check your glove box, Jerome. Check what she packed for you." My legs nearly gave out when I heard my name. Not my handle, not eastbound driver, but my actual name. The trucker was already backing toward his rig, shaking his head and muttering something about not getting paid enough for this. But I couldn't move. Nobody on this road knew my name. I hadn't given it over the radio, hadn't stopped anywhere since crossing the state line. And Sandra, she'd insisted I take some of my old things from the garage, practically forced a box of junk on me that I'd tossed in the passenger seat without looking. My hands trembled as I reached for the truck door, the sound of the Peterbilt's engine roaring to life behind me as the other driver took off without another word. Inside the cab, the dome light seemed too dim, casting shadows that moved wrong across the dashboard. The glove box latch felt cold under my fingers, and when I opened it, a manila envelope fell out onto the floor, one I'd never seen before. Sandra's handwriting was on the front. "Jerome, you need to know the truth about Copper Canyon." Inside were newspaper clippings, yellowed and brittle, dated from 6 years ago. The headline on the first one read, "Couple missing after canyon crash," with a photo that knocked the breath out of me. It was me, but younger, standing next to a woman I'd never seen before beside a silver Toyota. The article said Jerome Hutchinson and his wife Valerie had disappeared after their car went off the road at mile marker 17. Their bodies never recovered. But that was impossible. 6 years ago, I was living in Colorado, working construction, had never even been to this canyon before meeting Sandra. I grabbed the next clipping with numb fingers. Search called off for missing couple. And there was another photo, this one from a security camera at a gas station. Clear as day, it showed me filling up that same silver Toyota, the timestamp reading 3 days before the accident. The woman from the photo, Valerie, was visible through the passenger window. More clippings, more evidence of a life I'd never lived, a marriage I'd never had, a death that hadn't happened. The last item in the envelope was a note in Sandra's writing. "I found these in your things when we met. You said you didn't remember, that sometimes whole chunks of your past just weren't there. I should have told you sooner, but I was scared. Don't go through that canyon, Jerome. She's still waiting for you there." The CB crackled again, and this time the voice was barely a whisper, close and personal, like lips pressed against the microphone. "Jerome, stop reading those lies. You know who I am. You remember the way my hair smelled like vanilla, the scar on my palm from when I tried to cook you dinner on our anniversary. You remember the song that was playing when we crashed, our song. Turn the radio to FM 93.5. It's playing right now." My finger moved toward the radio dial without conscious thought, like muscle memory taking over, and I had to physically grab my wrist with my other hand to stop myself. The rational part of my brain was screaming that this was impossible, that I needed to drive away now, but my hand kept reaching for that dial. When I finally switched it over, static filled the cab for a moment, before a song faded in. Wonderwall by Oasis. The moment those opening chords hit, something cracked inside my skull like ice breaking on a frozen lake, and memories that weren't supposed to exist came flooding through. Valerie laughing in the passenger seat, singing off-key. The argument about her sister, the deer that jumped in front of us, the way the guardrail bent like paper when we hit it, her screaming my name as we went over. The silence after the rolling stopped. But underneath those memories were my other life, meeting Sandra 2 years ago at a bar in Albuquerque, our wedding, the divorce, the warehouse job. 2 complete histories existing in one mind, and I couldn't tell which one was real anymore. The woman on the CB spoke one more time. "I'm still in the car, Jerome. I never left. You did. You crawled out and walked away, and you forgot about me. But every time you drive through here, I try to bring you back. Come down to the car, come back to me. We can leave together this time." I looked down at my hands and saw blood under my fingernails that hadn't been there before, old and dried and flaking off. The newspaper clippings were dissolving in my lap, the ink running like water, forming new words. "You left her to die. You left her to die. You left her to die." I slammed the truck into gear and floored it, the trailer fishtailing wildly as I tore away from mile marker 17. The CB radio kept crackling with her voice, pleading, crying, then angry and screaming my name. But I reached over and ripped the power cord out of the dashboard. The silence that followed was almost worse. In my rearview mirror, I swear I could see headlights rising up from the embankment. Impossible headlights from a car that couldn't exist, following me through every curve. I drove for 3 straight hours without stopping, pushing that old Ford harder than I ever had, until I finally saw the lights of a 24-hour diner near the state line. I pulled in, parked under the brightest light I could find, and sat there until dawn, going through my wallet, my phone, looking for any proof of who I really was. Every photo of Sandra and me was real. My driver's license was real. The divorce papers were real. But so were the scars on my ribs that I'd never noticed before, the ones that looked like they came from a steering wheel impact. I made it home to New Mexico that morning and immediately went to the courthouse to pull public records. Jerome Hutchinson, my name, my social security number, had no death certificate, no missing person report, no record of ever being married to anyone named Valerie. But I found something else in the newspaper archives from 6 years ago. A small article about an unidentified woman's body found in a ravine near Copper Canyon, discovered by hikers months after an apparent car accident. Silver Toyota, partial plate matching what would have been mine if I'd lived in Utah then. She was wearing a wedding ring, but they never found out who she was. The article mentioned that investigators believed there might have been a passenger who walked away from the crash, based on blood evidence found leading up to the road. They never found him. I've never driven through Copper Canyon again, and I won't. I traded in my truck, got rid of the CB radio, moved to a different apartment. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear static that sounds like someone trying to speak. And sometimes when I look in the mirror, I see dried blood under my fingernails that takes forever to wash away. The night had bled into early morning by the time I clocked out from the hospital. My brain was foggy from 12 straight hours of trauma cases, and the only thing I could think about was coffee and a warm shower. The city was still asleep when I started driving home, and for the first few miles, everything felt routine. Then my GPS screen blinked, froze, and restarted with that soft chime I'd heard 1,000 times before. Only this time, it never came back online. I figured I knew the way well enough, but somewhere after the second intersection, I must have turned onto the wrong road. It did not look like any road I had taken before. The asphalt gave way to cracked pavement and then to gravel, flanked by tall weeds that brushed the sides of my car. The sky had started to pale, but there was no hint of dawn warmth, just that dull bluish light that makes everything look abandoned. The radio was dead too. Nothing but static. I kept telling myself it was fine, that I'd hit the highway again soon. But after 20 minutes of driving past nameless turns and sagging mailboxes, I realized I hadn't seen another car at all. When the gas light blinked on, I finally spotted a small gas station just ahead, a single row of pumps, a flickering sign, and a convenience store with the metal shutters halfway down. The lot was empty. I pulled in anyway, parked near the pumps, and stepped out to stretch my legs. The air was colder than I expected, the kind of damp chill that clings to you even through your scrubs. I tried opening my phone's map again, but it showed me floating in a gray void, no roads, no landmarks. That's when I noticed the houses behind the station. They were lined along the opposite side of the road, maybe half a dozen of them, all spaced far apart. Every single one had its lights on. Porch lamps, living room windows, even bedrooms glowing behind drawn curtains. And every front door I could see stood wide open. At first, I thought it was some kind of small-town quirk, maybe early risers or night shift workers like me. But there was no sound, no cars, no dogs, no movement at all. The air felt too still, like the world had paused mid-breath. I stood there for a long minute just staring at those houses. My first instinct was to call out to see if anyone answered back, but something inside me told me not to. I decided to get back into the car and keep driving, figuring the main road had to connect somewhere up ahead. As I pulled out, I glanced again toward the houses, and that was when I realized the street stretched farther than I'd thought. There were more houses beyond the curve, and all of them looked the same. Lights burning, doors hanging open, and absolute silence. The further I went, the worse it got. Every mailbox was empty, no cars in the driveways, not even trash bins by the curb. I started feeling this odd pressure in my chest, like the air itself was heavier the deeper I went into that place. My phone still had no signal, but I could see the battery draining faster than usual. I rolled the window down halfway, hoping to hear some hint of life. Insects, wind, anything. But all I caught was the low hum of my engine echoing between the houses. Eventually, I slowed the car down near an intersection where the road split in 3 directions. On the corner stood a small white house with peeling paint and a swing set in the yard. The swing was moving slightly, not fast, just that slow, steady sway that doesn't stop even when the air is still. I stared at it long enough to notice that the chain made no sound. I thought maybe it was the wind playing tricks, but there was no breeze. I put the car in park again, against my better judgment, and stepped out just to see if someone might be inside. The closer I got to that house, the more wrong everything looked. The porch light flickered faintly, and inside, through the open door, I could see the television playing static. A cereal bowl sat on the counter, milk still in it, spoon resting on the edge. It was like someone had just walked away mid-breakfast. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone home?" And the sound of my own voice made me flinch. It came out too loud, too real, like it didn't belong there. No answer came, but the swing behind me had stopped moving. I stepped inside just far enough to see the living room. The carpet was clean but damp, like it had absorbed humidity for weeks. A clock on the wall ticked quietly, yet every second felt drawn out, delayed. I remember thinking that the air smelled faintly like metal, and that detail stuck with me more than anything else. I called out again, softer this time, but my voice didn't carry far. There were family photos on the wall. 2 kids, a man in work clothes, a woman with dark hair, but all of the frames faced slightly downward, as if someone had adjusted them that way on purpose. A noise came from deeper inside the house, something light, like a foot dragging over linoleum. I froze in the doorway and listened. It happened again, slower, almost deliberate. My first thought was that someone needed help, but then I noticed the hallway lights turning off one by one, from the far end toward me. Each bulb dimmed with a faint pop, until only the living room lamp remained. My pulse hammered in my ears. I took a slow step backward toward the porch, trying not to make a sound, and that was when I saw movement in the reflection of the television screen. It wasn't clear enough to make out a person, more like a shape standing halfway down the hall. It didn't move toward me. It just stood there, outlined by the last flicker of light before the living room lamp blinked out completely. I stumbled outside, nearly tripping over the porch steps, and ran to my car without daring to look back at the door. When I slammed the door shut, the automatic headlights illuminated the front of the house. The porch light had gone dark, but in every other house up the street, the lights were still burning bright. I drove off fast enough to send gravel flying. The road twisted for miles, but every few turns I'd glimpse another cluster of houses, each one with that same eerie pattern. Lights on, doors wide open, no one in sight. I kept expecting to see a police car, a roadblock, something that would explain it, but the road only stretched farther into black fields. When my gas light started blinking again, I nearly panicked, thinking I'd never find my way back. Then out of nowhere, I saw the glow of a highway sign ahead. The sign didn't name a place I recognized, but the sight of it was enough to make me pull over and breathe for a second. My hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel, and my throat felt raw. Behind me, the road stretched into total darkness. No headlights, no glow from those houses. I turned my car around to check just to see if they were still there, but the moment I faced that direction again, the road was empty. It was like that whole stretch of town had folded in on itself. When I reached the highway, traffic had returned. Trucks, headlights, the hum of normal life. I took the next exit with an open diner and stumbled inside, still in my scrubs, smelling like antiseptic and fear. The waitress gave me a worried look and asked if I was okay. I told her I'd taken a wrong turn near the gas station a few miles back, but she frowned and said there hadn't been a gas station out that way in years. She even called over a man sitting at the counter, some local driver, who confirmed it used to exist but burned down sometime in the early 2000s. I thought maybe I'd just mixed things up. Maybe the exhaustion had finally caught up to me. But when I walked back to my car after finishing my coffee, there was a layer of fine gray dust coating the hood, like ash. I touched it with my fingertips, and it smeared dark, greasy, like soot. My shoes left faint prints of it on the floor mat when I drove home. I cleaned the car the next day, but I swear the smell lingered, faint, metallic, like the air inside that empty house. I have never found that road again, no matter how many times I tried tracing my route. I even showed the area on the map to a coworker once, and she said it looked like farmland, nothing else. Still, sometimes when I drive home after night shifts, I catch a glimpse of porch lights glowing far off past the tree line. Small, steady dots in the dark. And every single time I make sure to stay on the highway.